down NDSU. I also have the pleasure of being a PhD student in computer science, focusing on cybersecurity. So it's really been fun to work on integrating some of these new technologies in the design school. And certainly we sometimes consider some of these things to, like in cybersecurity, there's kind of a threat model in terms of what does this mean for design education, which we'll be talking a little bit about. So starting off with our panel, again, hold down the staff side of things with our design school. Andy an amazing illustrator and designer in his own right. He teaches a lot of our graphics design courses and drawing courses at India. Landscape graduates have been using tools in some remarkable ways. I'm looking forward to hearing more from them. So again, I'll pass the mic and you guys can introduce yourself a little bit further, and then we can talk about how we got.
Hi everyone, welcome to this this.
I should.
Oh, okay. Are we good?
I guess I'll use this mic now.
Well, my name is Andrew Stark. I teach over at Renaissance Hall. I have a history of working in painting, in graphic design, illustration. So I have a background in traditional media, but also new media and certainly graphic design realms and motion graphics. And Ben and I started talking about AI. Gosh, it's been 6 months. 6 months ago. We really just by chance began discussing the implications of AI and also with Assistant Professor Jennifer Brandel. We formed a kind of an IA or AI group where we would meet weekly or every other week to discuss concepts around AI. So our discussions have been really informative in how we can incorporate AI with design, with architecture, with illustration. What's happening in the field right now, which has been very disruptive in terms of how artists and illustrators and concept artists, especially are kind of grappling with this new technology. So we hope to discuss some of what we've been thinking about further.
My name is Benjamin Smale. I'm a graduate student at the School of Landscape Architecture, just over there at Clay Hall. I came across ChatGPT this fall, as well as the other design AI tools, and Ben stopped into our class to discuss this, and it kind of sparked this little impromptu workshop where we discovered as a class, what can these tools do? Are these images useful? Can we use them to portray ideas of the world that we design and art that we design? How can this allow us to more easily communicate with clients? So that's how I initially became interested in it.
I'm basically the same thing. I'm a master's student here at North Dakota State, again, just over at Client Hall. Some of the things that, again, like you said,
I'll pass the mic over there. I'll say that again. I'm also a master's student in landscape architecture here at NDSU, again, over at Clay Hall. And the same situation, when Ben came over and started, talking about some of the ways that we could use AI in the design profession. And I also looked into, some of the different other AIs, even kind of a little bit before that. And of course, ChatGPT. And I'm really eager to talk and discuss about some of the different implications and ways that we can use it.
One more thing. There it is. Now it has better. One thing I'll mention too is Shane and I both work part-time too. And we're in this unique position where we're both seeing at once how academia is embracing these AI tools and also how the respective companies we're working part-time for, how they interact with these tools.
So to kind of kick off where we began, so our conversations in the fall semester actually revolved around curriculum and technology integration. So Andy teaches a class called Architecture 231, where we do some drawing and we introduce students to digital illustration. And then I co-instruct a course called Architecture 232, Design Technology. So we wanted to make sure we have a lot of things in sequence and we work together to make sure we're giving students our best. And as we went on in the fall, it became more of an AI conversation than and how we were going to focus on dealing with these new tools as a faculty and how to introduce them to the students. And every week there was a new innovation or a new capability which didn't exist before. So to give you an example, if you went to, for those of you on laptops or smartphones, there's a fun demo. How many of you have used a text to image tool before? Yeah, all right, more than I thought. That's awesome. So when I'm demoing this tool to students in the public, there's a website called Crayon, CRAIYON.com, and it's a little slow. It uses kind of like Dolly 1, right? So it was a smaller image model. And again, fundamentally how this technology works is similar to ChatGPT, where we create a large data set of images, and those have been captioned. And then so we can train an AI to generate images from whatever text prompt we want. And so the larger the model of images, and of course we can also tune these models to give us specific image content. The more powerful, the more interesting, and of course the faster the images are. So the news over the summer was the fact that OpenAI launched Dolly 2, which is again a much more powerful tool than Crayon. And if you create an account on OpenAI's site, you have a certain set amount of images for free. And then of course, then their business model is, you can purchase additional image sets. And so this tool was in beta. And so I was waiting to get my account when I was visiting our graduate landscape architecture studio. And while I was assisting with some GIS software and waiting for things to download, we got into a conversation of, hey, has anyone been using this tool? And Ben was like, oh yeah, I've been playing with this stuff. And of course, all the other students were, hey, let's take a look. And I was annoyed because all the students were getting their beta accounts right away. And I was like, hey, I've been waiting for like 2 months. How come you guys are all just hopping in line and getting access right away? Well, it turned out that morning, OpenAI had left the beta and made the tool public. So I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense now why everyone is playing in the pool, and it's not just that OpenAI doesn't like me. So of course, that was a really exciting conversation to take back to Andy and a couple of our other architecture faculty is, this is no longer something behind closed doors. This is now something that we have to engage with as a faculty and as a design community. The other exciting bit is then early this fall, because the initial thought was this was kind of going to be a closed tool that you had to create an account. It would be in the cloud. You'd have to pay for access. Well, again, once a new technology comes out, there's this Pandora's box thing, right? Where a whole lot of other folks can innovate with the tool. So folks took some of these data sets and were able to successfully make a open source local version, which you can run on your own hardware. You don't need to run on the cloud, and you can get real-time results. So the most popular model is called Stable Diffusion. And so I set that up on one of our workstations. We have some 8 gig graphics cards, so we can spit out 6 512 by 512 images in about 5-6 seconds. And so I pulled all the architecture faculty and the visual arts faculty, and like, hey, what do you think as a design faculty? Is this a tool that empowers our students, or is this a plagiarism tool where I can take some shortcuts and turn things in at the last minute instead of focusing on a design? And again, it was fascinating, all the different conversations and different perspectives that we got. So I think that's a good point to turn over to Andy to get his viewpoint as both as a design educator and as an artist.
Yeah, I think I can use this mic. Yeah. So in my initial kind of knowledge about AI came from pop culture and hearing some inkling of how this new technology was being used. And initially, I was very skeptical about how this could supplement or co-pilot or in some way assist the design process and design thinking. So I came at this with and still am somewhat hesitant in the application of the technology. But after our conversations and learning more about how this is being used, because it was all happening, very, very quickly. In many ways, this technology, while it's been in the computer science world, I think for a longer period of time within the design world, illustration, certainly concept design, architecture, it's still more fresh, and not a lot of students were using it. But that gave me some hesitation. But after actually using a DALL-E, I found that the process was very engaging. It was fun. It was interesting to see the iterative process. That was one thing I was not expecting. I went in extraordinarily skeptical. And as someone with a background and in both traditional media, in digital media, and being in the tail end of Gen X, seeing the transition from especially analog photography into digital, from the early days of the internet to Adobe tools, which were just kind of launching, and were in still a very early stage when I was an undergrad. There was still this great appreciation for the handmade. Right. And so, especially within graphic design, illustration, everything was still hand painted. It was hand cut. These are the days in architecture where you're still hand building everything. So, that kind of that belief in the handmade quality of something and the materiality of especially creative and generative works is something that I really value. And something that we still value in Renaissance Hall, but the iteration process itself, the ideation process itself, and especially the prompts became the creativity generator for me, for my experience. Not necessarily the result. DALL-E 2 is still very rough. Especially in terms of how figures, human anatomy, the way it's scraping images and kind of recombining. It's very surrealistic in a way. You often have figures with 7 or 8 fingers. That's very typical. Midjourney is much better. But for this technology that's still in the early days, there was this fascination, this amazement. I would say, as far as an assistant to the generative process, I could see so much possibility there, but then also great fear. And I think this is something among illustrators, among concept designers, graphic designers, that this overtakes positions, it overtakes jobs. You've already seen this in the popular culture that magazines or editorial, businesses are using AI art to supplement or to replace a freelance illustrator, a freelance graphic designer. That's already happening. So on the one hand, well, I found the actual experience of the generation, the prompt, which became all about the language I was using, and you could certainly direct the prompt in a specific direction. The actual result was, fairly rough and sketchy, but one thing I will add, just before I don't want to dominate the whole panel, but one thing I will add is that especially in the foundations level, within graphic design, within the foundations of art and design, it's so important to us to instill in students the idea of iteration, of design thinking, of actually working through problems, of failure, of especially in graphic design, the design process of empathizing, of doing ideation, of creating 100 different iterations, and that's an active process. And so that is the one thing about the AI models that I hope doesn't replace that early student experience, because I think going through that trial and error, the slight gradual change of iterative design, pencil to paper, is it's not easy, right? And so much of the especially like DALL-E or generative AI, it makes this process easy. And so inevitably, if these tools are not here in 10 years, or it's moved on as all technology moves on, are we left with individuals who are unable to work in that iterative process, or that it ends up being lost? So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah. One point that I wanted to speak to was and an important piece of context for those who aren't designers is that whatever we create, whatever we're designing, we're looking to create the opportunity to evoke some sort of emotion. And the first question I had when I was playing with these AI tools is, okay, how does AI know what emotions or feelings could be created by something like a painting,
right,
or experiencing a landscape in Shane and I's case? And we found that it was remarkably well, and something we'll show with the images a little later, is that the AI is able to predict activities and emotions that make sense in an illustration. So if I wanted to create an image of somebody walking down a trail through a forest that was very inspirational and gave them a feeling of solitude, it would give me an image that really gives me those emotions that I had described to it. So it has a really great way of taking these prompts of, this is an emotion I want to feel, now show me something that will give me that emotion. And that's the real power of it, I found.
Just to give a sort of background of, us as designers, we always think of things as going through all the different design phases. Once you have a site, once you have a project, there's the sort of research and analysis phase to things. Then there's a conceptual design. Then there's that design development. And then the next step is to sort of communicate the design via, construction documentation and so on. And I found especially most of these AI tools are especially now in their current forms, are best used in that earlier conceptual design phase. And like you were pointing out earlier, like I never even really thought of the fact that, because all these AI tools are kind of in our later undergrad / in our masters, that we might be missing out on an experience of first learning on how to conceptualize things in different ways, and sort of using that design process that's been used for pretty much the entirety of our profession. And like you kind of give a bit of a spoiler, we're going to show a couple of different images of using some of these tools in just a simple way. But yeah.
So let's get back to some of the how fast this technology has been moving. And again, it's one of the fun challenges I have as a technologist is how to, I get to be the Prometheus guy, right? Like, hey, look at this new tool. And then, of course, some of the faculty view that more as the Pandora's box, right? The wait, that's not what we were looking for. That's not what we wanted. And then we get to deal with some of the consequences, which is, again, one of the joys of working in higher education. Some of the Pandora's box things which have happened as this technology has evolved is earlier this summer, the Atlantic came under fire because they had used DALL-E 2 to generate an illustration instead of hiring an illustrator. And again, the editor was like, well, again, we had a short deadline. We just need to come up with something quick. And again, how often in any of our professions is there that problem of, oh, deadline coming up, we need to generate something, right? And so that's one of the alluring things of this text-to-image technology. Then again, in the early fall, there was I believe it was a Colorado State design competition. And so, of course, people could submit artwork and, compete for prizes. And one of the winning artworks was revealed after the competition to be generated in Midjourney. So Midjourney is, again, once DALL-E 2 was out there and really successful, a private company decided to make their own generative art model, which really focuses on a more artistic style and also a photorealistic style. It works through Discord. So if you go to Midjourney's website, again, you can get some free credits and you put your text prompt into Discord and then it generates images back. And then, of course, after your free credits, then there's a subscription model. And again, it's what comes out of there is really remarkable. So, of course, there was that, ethical question from the art community of, is it ethical to generate art from a platform versus making the art? Then, of course, there's that other fun ethical bit of with the images which are making up the engines which drive this stuff. Of course, DALL-E 2 famously just pulled a whole bunch of image sets from a lot of different places. And maybe those artists didn't think that that's how the images were going to be used, especially if you're a known illustrator or concept artist with a specific style. And so to really get the most out of these AI tools, and how to get the most out of the prompt generation, there is a really powerful guide. I believe it's called the DALL-E 2 prompt guide. It's like 100 pages of examples and what you can generate from prompts. And so, again, if you type in, the image you're looking for plus the style of the artist, and of course, the more images that the artist has used, the more that, your prompt is going to be in that style. Or if you use the prompt digital art or 4K, or even the name makes of models of specific cameras, you can really get some fascinating images. But again, what if I didn't agree as an artist that my style is now able to be automatically generated? Another, like a couple other challenges with this technology is the ability to come up with some photorealistic stuff. And so from a cybersecurity perspective, there's that disinformation angle. So there's an open source intelligence group called Bellingcat, and they deal with a lot of disinformation issues. And so I was kind of surprised yesterday when one of their analysts decided to generate photorealistic images of the former President Trump being arrested. And of course, those hit social media like wildfire, actually hit the international news. And again, it's like, your job is to investigate disinformation, and you kind of created an image which is being used for disinformation, but it illustrates a pretty valuable point. There was also recently a popular Instagram channel where there was what folks believed to be a professional photographer generating photorealistic, well, taking images, black and white images of people, but it was later revealed that he was using Midjourney, cleaning up in Photoshop and passing off what looked like black and white photographs as being AI generated. So again, there's some really interesting questions with the use of these tools. And then yesterday, Adobe released their own version of these AI tool sets called Project Firefly. So again, you can go to their website, sign up for the beta, and see what Adobe is doing with these tool sets. So they're promising the art community that they're only using their stock library or an opt-in model where artists can choose to have their work in this image set and be generated, as opposed to the opt-out model. Andy, maybe.
Well, and also, Ben, I think you touched on something there that we had talked about and discussed in our meetings, was the ethical concerns over using these tools. And I mean, obviously for thousands of years, artists, designers, painters, we've all been influenced by what has come before. I mean, that's just human nature. And especially in in Renaissance, early Renaissance, there were assistants. We had the Painters Guild. There was a long tradition of artists working with another artist. They're copying their work. That was how they would learn about color and composition and technique and style and subject matter and actual material. And so but using that experience, they would then generate innovation. They would generate their own work, and then the cycle would continue. And that was it's kind of this muddy area, where you have work that is out there in the world, millions and millions of images. We're just saturated with images that are open to anyone to access, and so those ethical concerns about what images I'm generating. I don't know where the content is coming from. I don't know where the this kind of photo bashing or mishmash of image that's being created, that I can direct very specifically. In fact, say I would like a work in the style of a certain artist with this specific lens, and I would like it to look like a Stanley Kubrick scene from The Shining or something. So you can. And once you get that, one could argue that, okay, this is what artists do, right? We take images. We have an encyclopedia of images in our heads that we are combining, or we have many different influences. What do we always tell artists and designers to do when they're first starting a project? Is go research, look at what other people are doing, look at what the history of work. That we synthesize all of these things and come up with something that's new. Isn't DALL-E 2 doing that? I say, well, yes, in one sense, yes, but but I'm not convinced that is a supplement or a substitute, right? I think it's an amazing. I love that word, co-pilot or assistant. Is an amazing assistant, especially in that generative area of where to, especially students. We started a new project. One of the big, toughest things to do is get started. It's kind of that blank canvas, right? Where do I start? These tools can be an amazing leaping off point. It can give you so many directions. The only thing about it is that you don't have a lot of control about where these images are coming from. So the Firefly launch, you can see that many of within the creative community, rather than this taking control of artists or supplementing or eliminating positions, Adobe at least seems to be taking the position of you take control of the technology. Use this to empower your own design process. In fact, they are addressing the ethical concerns about copyrighted images by only having Adobe stock images that have been allowed to be used. So it's interesting to see where that's going to go. And this is brand new. Ben mentioned it just dropped yesterday, so very new. But for me, it's an interesting problem in terms of how we deal with influence, deal with inspiration and creativity. And also within the design process, we always start with empathy, right? These machine learning models don't have empathy. So if I'm meeting with, say, the farmer's market, and they need a new logo, is the machine learning model going to be able to empathize with their needs, as well as me sitting down with them, talking to them, learning about what they need within the community? Or if they're, they decided to go with an AI prompt, that would be an interesting test, to see who is coming up with a closer design that communicates what their needs. Because ultimately, as artists, as visual designers, we are trying to communicate ideas. So
one of the things I want to do later in the semester is the text to image, John Henry competition. So let's take some of the faculty and students and take someone who isn't as proficient as design using the AI tool and judge who can come up with better content and how fast. And that'd be a fun little thought experiment, but especially as this technology continues to advance. But if Ben and Shane, if you could take us through a little bit more about what landscape architecture is, what your thesis studio is. And one of the things as a design technologist, I really focus on workflow. And one of the things I love about working with the faculty and students is that every designer has their own workflow for how they do their design. How especially we have so many young professionals in our school. How do we learn from each other's workflows? And then, how does your workflow change over time from entering in the program to, about to graduate with a master's? And then I imagine as a part of that conversation, then Jeremy will be putting some images up on the screen. So instead of just talking about how these tools work, we can show you.
Yeah. Talking about some of the stuff that you guys already touched on, the way that, Adobe and basically every company, every entity out there that is able to make AI is making AI, and all this stuff is just coming out, daily, it seems. And the use of that and its impact on the design profession and then the way that we do work, and like you kind of started to mention, like the workflow is ever changing. And maybe Ben can also touch on this too. It's just as for our point of view, as we're relatively young in the whole design world. Things were always even handcrafted, quite literally. I would hear stuff from my bosses talking about when he got out of college, everybody was talking about the new typewriter. And then, the process was, once you got into a firm, you spent 1 or 2 weeks just copying the company font because that was just what you did. Then you had to get the same exact design style. Well, and then things like AutoCAD came in and we could do things 2D. We could, replicate it on a computer, and it was much easier to print that way. Then we got into, a lot more 3D modeling, and that stuff has always been evolving. And not only can we just put something into a computer and model it in 3D, and some of that's still even probably evolving basically, just as fast as AI itself is, just the rendering ability of all these sorts of things, because especially of I would say later years here, that the hardware to render all these sort of things is really caught up. And now to render an image from, something that would 10 years ago take just forever, we can do in a workday. It becomes extremely much more efficient over time. And the way that I see AI, developing, now it's in Adobe, now it's going to be in everything. I just see it as another tool on our tool belt. I forget who said it, but I was talking with somebody else about, AI generally, and we kind of came up with the concept that AI is maybe not now, now it's sort of seen as like a threat to jobs, like it's going to replace things. But I think we're going to see it more as like a calculator. Yeah, it can, do math and stuff faster than us, but we know the general variables, we know the human element that it can never really truly know. Like we can actually have that relationship with clients. We can actually have that broad design idea. We're just going to use it to get a little bit closer to there. And especially now it's again used more in conceptual phases and getting ideas out there. One of the things I actually did at work was we had a design shred for a new site. And I just simply thought of, well, I don't even need to go to Dolly or something like that and type in, design me this, because it won't give me the result I want. But I can think of, here's elements I want to get in there. Do I want, these sort of tall grass with boulders? And then it's so much easier for me to type a prompt in saying, give me, boulders with the, golden grass landscape, or, imagine a stream with, lavender flowers around it. I mean, I can basically instantly spit out that image and use that as concept elements. And then we can use that to redefine what the design is. But something like that and showing that to a client so that instead of just words and maybe there's some miscommunication there, you can say, I'm looking at something like this. And it's just so much easier to do that. And I think AI just as a tool, obviously is going to evolve even more and more, but I'm really interested in seeing that. Another thing is, we started talking about, the data training, whatever data that you put into it is sort of what you get out. And I think especially over time and as we kind of grow with it, I'm really curious to see, especially bigger firms or people that have been designing for a long time, being able to input your own data from your own work over, what could be, for one person, it could already just be a couple of decades. Then you add a whole office, then you add an entire firm from how many other offices, then you can expand and contract all that sort of things into creating something that is effectively your company's style or this person's style. And I'm really interested to see if we can start training, our own AI. For a firm will have its own AI just to generate concept images, and based off of something that they already did, because they would own it.
That's another area that could be, used well, especially in the Dolly model, where you have everything that's put into the model, you're scraping, and then it's recombining that. And so, eventually, if you're iterating on the iterations, you kind of create this closed loop of information and images, and that could generate work that maybe is kind of mundane or blah, or it all kind of starts to look the same, or it's kind of, there's this homogeneity among all of the images. So I think there's a danger there among, like if everyone is using that base set of images, you could come up with something that's pretty kind of boring, but I love the idea of being able to use your own iterations that maybe you've come up with. Maybe you're feeding it images from a sketchbook, and then it's generating images on that, and then that you're iterating again on that. And especially with the Adobe model. I don't know if you've seen the app yet, but it looks amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're right though. If it's such a closed loop of data that it could get mundane. And one of the, just the best things about the design profession is just the pure variety, even in one day. I really just enjoy working on one project on 1 hour, and then I can switch and I can go back and forth and I can do different things. I can do different aspects of the project, but maybe it could be something more like you can prioritize certain data. Maybe I could see something like you have a certain project and you're looking at making a certain type of plaza. So maybe you can say, well, let's not use the general park data or streetscape or whatever. We can start to confine on an idea that's based around something like this, but then not only use our own, because we can use our own, but prioritize that and then compare it against other things and then really start to move along at a conceptual phase. Another thing I would really love to see, and hopefully and probably in the near future, is getting not just using AI as a tool in the conceptual phase, but starting to use it in different, design development and construction documentation. I mean, right now, everything's images, everything's through pixels, but some things are starting to get into vectors. And the way that we use things like, especially like AutoCAD, if we can create like design details from a project with dimensions, and then be able to go into any sort of program and easily change that instead of having to go in and Photoshop every single thing, that would be, I mean, I don't even know what kind of efficiency we would have that.
I wanted to tie back to a point that Ben brought up, which is the thesis design process. And those of you who have entered graduate school, we know that to do a thesis, we need to create new knowledge. And that's the big, as we learned in the last panel, that's the big limiting factor with these AI tools, is that there's only a certain amount of data out there. So we found that in the design process for a thesis project, where you do want to always be creating something new, but again, you're able to go back and look at people's work and copy that. Excuse me. Yeah. Thinking how to articulate this.
Sure.
We need to come to the table with information about the project. So we need to almost create our own data set that we can feed to this AI image generating tool, so it knows the context of our project. So
yeah, I think you're speaking to the sense that the AI can't have that human element of that relationship between the client, and we're the only ones that, I mean, we're the medium that it gets communicated, and we can kind of be the bottleneck or the problem there if we don't give it the correct information. Whatever you put in is pretty much whatever is what you get out of it.
A bit about new technologies and how this is obviously, it's an extraordinarily disruptive and exciting technology. I mean, I kind of liken it to the printing press, and you think of all of those, those monks out of a job of illuminated manuscripts, hunched over, drawing away. I mean, once the printing press came along, it completely changed the landscape of image distribution, and then certainly throughout the early 20th century and Industrial Revolution, and moving into screen printing. And in Renaissance, we really value all these old technologies. We have the Vandercook letterpresses. We have students working in letterpress now, but that was the dominant form of production of 2D printed works, right? And of course, we have printers who were hunched over. These heavy drawers full of lead type, and pressing type all day. Now we value it for its material quality. I mean, there's something within a letterpress work that you can't print on a laser printer. There is still that materiality of the ink in the way it soaks in with paper, and the embossing. We value that, right? But that technology, while it replaced many positions, it became more of a niche, or even something that was appreciated more as an artistic tool. So it may be that technologies that we like right now are considering, or even the positions that may be replaced by these technologies. They could, just like, you look at history, we're always going back, reimagining what was old becomes new again. It may be that we just end up valuing the handmade more because of these. If we're completely saturated with AI generated work, it could be that the handmade becomes even more precious. So, but just like, Photoshop, Illustrator, initial Adobe tools, they didn't replace graphic designers, right? It became a tool that they were using. And I think this is also a tool that can be really amazing in terms of how we utilize it. Now, if you couple this with like VR, and especially in architecture, landscape architecture, where you're bringing a client into a VR space, and you as the designer is saying, oh, okay, so you would like the plaza here, or what about over here? And then it becomes this haptic experience, right? And that certainly, that may not be too far off with how things are going.
So maybe this is a good time to show, not just tell. So but then Shane, you'd like to ask Jeremy to show some of your guys' work on the screen and talk us through how a landscape architect might use some of these tools.
So I can't open the window here, but as you're leaving the building, you may notice the Sons of Norway parking lot here. In the background is Berry Hall. And Shane and I just had a conversation of, hey, what if this was a park? Just a random idea. This is happening all over town. You saw this happen in over on Broadway too. They turned a parking lot into a downtown plaza. So simple idea that exists in the real world. Can the AI show us what that might look like? So you can go to the next picture if you're able, Jeremy. So this is a prompt that was given here is like, let's create a outdoor plaza with people doing activities. And I'll show you what the prompt said at the end, but you can try to kind of pick this apart and see if you can come up with what that prompt was. But you're able to take an image that, like I took outside, and erase the parking lot using the Dolly tools. And then it will fill that area that you erased with what the prompt is. And then you're able to use the power of iterations, and it will try to imagine what this place will feel like when I'm on the other side of it. Or I could even add and say, what would this be like in a different season or different time of day? Or perhaps here I wanted to say there were less people in the park or more people in the park. So you can go forward once more, Jeremy, and we can see the iterations that Dolly generates. And you can see, again, like the people, like you're saying, Andy, they might have 8 fingers, but we can tell that these are people perhaps enjoying an ice skating rink. And that's something that I did not prompt. That was just an idea of an activity in a park that's really popular in these sort of downtown plazas. And it's able to suggest that as a programming element for this park.
Yeah, and this goes to that same idea that we were kind of mentioning before, is that sometimes with this sort of AI image generation, is that you kind of skip a step compared to normal. Like you kind of miss out on the experience of trying to figure out what should go here, like what are the needs and functions of this site, and it kind of gets that concept in your head of like, once you see, so many times in design, even if you're just seeing somebody else's work or whatever it might be. In this case, you see the ice skating rink and you're like, yeah, this thing's an ice skating rink. And now all your future designs are kind of imprinted with that idea of, yeah, let's implement this in some way. And it kind of fast forwards that step before you even know it.
If you could go one more as well, Jeremy. It even like picks up on some of the small nuances of design, which is like pavement patterns, jointing patterns, entrances. You can see there's kind of like an entranceway through the snow to get to what appears to be an ice rink. They're planting trees along walkways and roads. It's things that are all very familiar to us to create the experience of being in the built world. So you could go once more, that's one more iteration, and then to the final one, which has our prompt. Excuse me, one more. There we go. So I simply just erased that plaza in the original image, and that was my prompt. So within 2 minutes, I was able to take an image, generate an idea for a park, and then look at it from different angles and get ideas for what could this park be.
So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, both from here and our friends online. And again, I'd like to thank Ben and Shane for, again, being willing to explore some new tools. Thesis development time is precious, and they spend a lot of time working with their faculty and classmates on some really cool design work, which they'll be happy to present at the end of the semester. And then, of course, all the work that Andy has done working with these tools and really being thoughtful as a design educator. How do we use these tools to maximize the student experience and benefit?
All right, so our first question, it looks like Chancellor Hagrot has actually got a question. So Chancellor, if you want to start us off.
Yeah. And again, you can drop the Chancellor, just say, adjunct professor, or I am still a scholar in the Northern Plains Ethics Institute, but this is really a great discussion. I want to come back a little bit to the questions you mentioned on who owns the data. Because, the internet was created in 1969 on the Honeywell 516 computer using taxpayer money. And several history books said it was the biggest giveaway of Americans' intellectual rights ever in the planet when we gave cyberspace away. Basically, the American taxpayers owned this. And as an energy producing country, we know a lot about Norway. Every Norwegian person owns an equal share of energy of Norway, right? All the oil is owned by Norwegians. We have a model here in North America of giving land away or taking it away from the Indians and giving stuff away. And so we now have ChatGPT that is only able to develop itself by taking other people's data. Yet, as some of you pointed out, like Adobe saying only using these images, which will be impossible, is my gut feeling. So I'll throw this question out. What would you think about, we just put a tax on AI? We put a tax, expanded that, on social media and the internet, that it really was created by the American taxpayers giving the money. It's now using all these people's data. And the simple thing is there's just a tax on the machine and the data, instead of trying to figure out all these impossible questions of, which company owns the rights to which image. So just throw that out there, and feel free to engage the premise too, that, the taxpayers really aren't entitled, or the human beings in America aren't really entitled to this ownership either. But, I know I'm not completely off, because Yuval Harari, if you've ever read him, he wrote Homo Deus and other books, a guy named Yuval Harari. He said, the way we've given away data in America is equivalent to almost the Manhattan Indians giving away the island of Manhattan for some beads, right? They had no idea the value. And that's his feeling about how we've given data away without getting something in return. So I'll throw that out to any of you there.
I want to take a first crack from that on a cybersecurity angle. So, of course, the U.S. government certainly could enforce a tax on that type of service. But, just like, we have, Google and Bing and Yahoo, there's a Russian search engine called Yandex, right? And your search results might be a little different on Yandex, especially on different topics than the US-based search engines. So I would suspect that if we did create a tax regime around AI, there would be foreign governments which would not have similar taxes, which would make their models more freely available. And again, there might be an interesting consequence to that as a result. But anyone else want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think you're right. If somebody creates a sort of barrier, especially a paid barrier, that's going to stop a lot of people, and a sort of black market will definitely happen, that people will find alternatives. We already see that sort of stuff with people pirating from, Netflix and Hulu and all that sort of stuff. Something that I kind of saw based off of, especially every, sort of product line turning to subscriptions, because it's continual revenue instead of just a one-time hit, is that whether it have to be as a firm, because already just now as firms are for different programs like any CAD software, any 3D modeling software, all these different softwares are sort of just paid as a subscription now. And usually that's the sort of thing that's just covered by a firm. But maybe, I don't know if it could be maybe just a certain data set for different, different careers. So maybe there's a sort of landscape architecture, or just the general design of a design data set that you buy into. And then you can sort of say, then you can buy data sets from different entities. And as a firm, you can say, well, we want to include our own, but if somebody else wants ours, they got to pay for it. And maybe there's can be a sort of community of different data sets. And that way somebody can say that I own at least part of this, or I can say I own this image or this sets of images, but giving a proper reason onto how to sort of sell the data at some point or buy into it, and who owns it is whose guess.
And that exists for Stable Diffusion now, so that I can tune my model for photorealistic landscapes. I can tune my model to generate stuff in the style of Pixar or Disney, or anime, which has been pretty popular. Jeremy is queuing me, I think, for either other questions or to wrap up for the next panel.
Yeah, so we are unfortunately out of time. I do have a few questions from online. So obviously for those of us in the room, if you have questions, we do have about a 10-minute break here. I'll go ahead if anybody wants to go. There may still be food out there. I can't see from here whether they cleared it or not. But I'll go ahead while people are doing that. Please feel free to get up and do that. I'm going to, if you guys don't mind, I'll ask you the questions from online since we don't really have another way of answering them other than using the microphones. But again, this is the break time. So for those of you in the room that need to take a quick break, we'll do that. And in about 5 minutes, we'll switch over to the other panel. So our first question from online is: the text to image links in these AI tools have been scraped from the training data sets, which has largely been content on the web. Word associations in design are extremely contextual. How do these systems embed the context of a discourse in their text-based image generation? And a second part to the question, is diffusion the correct model to model creativity?
I'd like to take a stab at the first question. I think it goes back to coming to the table with your own data, and that data can be the prompt you give it in text, or it can be like I showed earlier, an image. I think that's one of the most rich pieces of data you can give to an image, a text image generator, is an actual set of pixels.
I'll take another quick stab. So some of these models are trained. So for example, one of my favorites is thispersondoesnotexist.com. So, we take a pile of images of people, and then we can train an AI to recognize, well, what makes up people. And of course, a lot of other people riffed off these GAN models. So there's this cat doesn't exist. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other this doesn't exist. So that's one way we generate these models. Another is there's many academic data sets where their images paired with captions. So then we can train the AI, what does this caption mean? What does this caption mean? And then, so that's how we get some of these keywords like digital art, 4K, landscape. And then when we combine these words together, then we get to see some fascinating output.
All right, our next question from online is: are there any low or no cost entries to getting started with these types of AIs, training private AI on new data sets? The poster says they haven't heard Harvard made their own GPT. Had heard that Harvard made their own GPT on a Raspberry Pi.
Yep. So Stable Diffusion, 2 words. Check that out. You can, there's documentation on how you can download and set up your own environment, or you can use some free online environments. And of course, for just getting started with some of the prompts, that Crayon website is pretty useful.
All right, and our last question from online, from Robert, who says, as a graduate student himself, His experience in AI language and image models will be done through the professional field. But as AI models become more prevalent in the field of design, what new roles or skill sets might emerge for architects, and how can educational institutions such as NDSU adapt to prepare students for these changes?
Good question.
The first thing I think of is the ability to write good prompts, especially right now. A lot of these different sites, once you put in an email, once you make an account, you have a certain amount of tokens that you can use. And sometimes, especially when you're messing around, you get one idea, you write one prompt, and you're like, oh, well, I should change this thing. And I would say at least one of the things would be the ability to write a very good prompt in order to get a good result.
I'll add one thing on that too, is the ability to learn how to use image prompts correctly. So learning how to take really good photography that the AI responds to well, but also looking into the future, how VR reacts with it. How can we use drone photography? Shane said something really cool happens if you put a Google Earth image into these AI tools. So that's something I'd like to try.
And then finally, and since we're running out of time, if folks want to follow up more with questions or how we can make use of these tools, hit me up, bernard@ndsu.edu, BERNARD@ndsu.edu. It's, again, a fascinating field, which is going to impact design now and going forward. And thank you, Jeremy, for making this opportunity possible. Thank my panelists here for taking some of their time to share their experiences with us.